The building was new since my time. All glass and steel where I remembered brownstone and iron, but the name was the same. Williams. I'd seen it in newspapers, on television, carved into half the construction sites in the city. For 50 years, I'd trained myself not to flinch at the sight of it. I was flinching now. The foreclosure notice was in my purse. Third notice. Final notice. 30 days. The numbers had stopped making sense 6 months ago, around the time Robert's medical bills exceeded what we'd saved in 40 years of marriage. I'd sold everything that could be sold. This was what remained. A job application for a position I was 20 years too old for, at a company I'd sworn never to approach. The lobby smelled like money. That particular combination of leather and filtered air and fresh flowers that costs more than most people's rent. A young woman sat at the reception desk, her hair in striking red against her dark suit. Her nameplate read, Sean O'Malley, Guest Services Manager. She looked up as I approached, and I watched her do the math. Gray hair, sensible shoes, hands that shook slightly as I held out my application. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not pity, exactly. Something more careful. I'm here about the waitress position, I said. For the executive dining room. Of course. She took the application, scanned it quickly. Mrs. Williams, you haven't worked outside the home in quite some time. No, I said. I was a caregiver. My husband was ill for many years. It was true as far as it went. The lies in my life had always been the things I didn't say. Sean looked at me for a long moment. The work is demanding. Long hours, difficult clients. We have applicants in their 20s who burn out. I understand. Do you? She leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Williams, I'll be frank. You're not our typical candidate. Help me understand why you're here. The honest answer would take hours I didn't have and open doors I'd spent a lifetime keeping closed. So I gave her the simple truth instead. I'm about to lose my home, I said. I need work, and I need it quickly. I'm a hard worker. I learn fast. I won't let you down. Sean was quiet for a moment, her fingers tapping lightly on my application. Then she nodded. Uniform fitting is Monday at 9. First shift is Wednesday.
Can you manage that?
The relief made my knees weak.
Yes.
Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said, but there was something almost kind in her voice. Wednesday, you'll see if you actually want this job. The uniform was crisp and black and made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Sean spent Monday and Tuesday training me on the computer system, the table arrangements, the unspoken hierarchies of who got served first and how. She was patient but exacting. I liked her for it. The clientele here are executives from the building, she explained. Some of them will be rude. Some will ignore you entirely. Some will try to proposition you, regardless of your age. The key is to be professional, efficient, and essentially invisible. I've had practice at that, I said. She glanced at me sharply, but didn't ask. Wednesday arrived with an unseasonable cold snap. I took 2 buses to get to the building, arriving 40 minutes early because I couldn't afford to be late. The dining room was beautiful in a sterile way, all white tablecloths and angular silverware and light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. My first few tables went smoothly. A pair of lawyers discussing a merger, barely looking up as I refilled their water. A woman in a severe suit who ordered a salad she didn't eat. I was starting to think I might actually manage this when the room changed. It was subtle at first. A hush that spread from the entrance, like ripples in water. I glanced up to see a group of men in dark suits entering, parting around a central figure, like a presidential detail. The man at the center looked exhausted. Late 50s, maybe 60, with silver-shot dark hair and a bearing that suggested he was used to people moving out of his way. He walked with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, scanning the room with an expression of profound weariness. "Who is that?" I whispered to Marcus, one of the other servers. He looked at me like I'd asked who the president was. "That's Smith Williams. Owns the building. Owns the company. Owns half the city, basically. He never comes down here." The name hit me like a hand around my throat.
Smith.
It was a common enough name. No reason to think. But I was already looking, already searching his face for traces of the boy I'd known. The bone structure was right, the way he held his head. Those eyes, gray as November rain, were the same eyes that had looked up at me from a feverish pillow when he was 5 years old. I turned away quickly, focusing very intently on the table I was clearing. Don't look at me, I thought. Please, just don't. Beatrice? The voice was uncertain, tentative. But it was his voice, deeper and aged by decades, but unmistakably his. I turned slowly. He was standing 3 feet away, his entourage forgotten behind him. His face had gone absolutely white. B, he said again, and the nickname no one had used in 50 years broke something open in my chest. We stared at each other across the pristine dining room. I watched him struggle through disbelief, confusion, recognition, joy, and then something darker that I couldn't name. His hand came up, reaching toward me or warding me off. I couldn't tell which. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. The sound of his body hitting the floor was oddly soft, absorbed by expensive carpet. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. His security detail surrounded him. Someone was shouting for a doctor. Sean appeared with her phone, speaking quickly to emergency services. I stood frozen, a water pitcher in my hand, watching paramedics flood into the room. They surrounded him, blocked him from view. I couldn't see if he was breathing. Sean was suddenly in front of me, her face pale. Beatrice. When he collapsed, he was looking directly at you. He said a name. She paused. He said B. I couldn't speak. My voice had left me entirely. How do you know Mr. Williams? She asked. I don't. I lied. I mean, I used to. A long time ago. I was his nanny. When he was a child. The words hung in the air between us. Sean's expression shifted through several calculations I couldn't read. Come with me, she said, and her hand on my arm was gentle but firm. She took me to a small office off the kitchen and sat me down with a glass of water I couldn't drink. My hands were shaking too badly to hold it. Just stay here, Sean said. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be back. She left, and I was alone with 50 years of ghosts. I closed my eyes, and I was back in the garden of the old Williams house, the one they'd torn down to build something more modern. Roses and honeysuckle and a little boy with scraped knees running toward me, his face bright with uncomplicated joy.
B,
look what I found. A beetle in a jar. A bird's nest blown down by wind. A perfectly round stone from the driveway. Each treasure presented with the solemnity of a child who believed I would find them as fascinating as he did. I had loved him with a fierceness that surprised me. I'd never had children of my own. Robert and I had tried, but it hadn't happened, and eventually we'd stopped talking about it. Smith had filled that hollow place in me. For 6 years, I'd been more his mother than his own mother had managed to be. Eleanor Williams had been a ghost in her own house, beautiful and sad and unreachable. She'd drift through rooms like smoke, touching nothing, speaking to no one. Her husband, Arthur, was gone more than he was home, building his empire. Smith had been raised by staff, and I'd been the one he'd attached himself to. I'd thought it would last forever. I'd been 28 years old and stupid enough to believe that love mattered more than money or power or a man's pride. The door opened. A man in an expensive suit stepped in, closing it behind him with a careful click. He was thin and severe, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. Mrs. Williams, he said. Not a question. I'm James Davies, legal counsel for Williams Corporation. I said nothing. You were hired 3 days ago with no recent employment history, no references from the past 40 years. And on your first shift, the CEO of this company collapsed after seeing you. He paused. I'm going to need you to explain your connection to Mr. Williams. I was his nanny, I said. A long time ago. I don't think he recognized me. The shock. Of course he recognized you, Davies interrupted. He's been asking for you. Quite insistently, in fact. Which is interesting, given that there's no record of a Beatrice Williams ever being employed by the Williams family. My heart stuttered. I was employed by them for 6 years. Then where are the employment records? The tax documents? The references? His voice was cold, precise. Mrs. Williams, I've been with this family for 30 years. I've seen people try every conceivable scheme to extract money from them. Most are more subtle than this, I'll grant you. I'm not trying to extract anything. Then what are you trying to do? You appear out of nowhere, gain employment through a manager who's been here less than a year and doesn't know the family history, and coincidentally encounter Mr. Williams on your first day? That's quite a coincidence. It was a coincidence, I said, but my voice sounded thin even to me. Davies leaned against the desk, studying me. Mr. Williams is in a vulnerable position right now. His father died 18 months ago. He's been running the company alone, under considerable stress. The last thing he needs is someone from his past appearing with unclear motives. My motives are clear. I need a job. At his company specifically? I had no answer for that. That wouldn't damn me. Davies straightened. I'm going to recommend to Mr. Williams that we terminate your employment, effective immediately. We'll provide 2 weeks severance, which is generous given the circumstances. In return, I'll need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding today's events. He pulled a document from his folder, placed it on the desk with a pen. I can't accept that, I said. I'm afraid it's not optional. Then I suppose you'll have to fire me without the agreement. We looked at each other. I saw him recalculate, trying to determine what kind of threat I posed and how to neutralize it. Before he could speak, the door opened again. A young paramedic looked in, slightly out of breath. Mr. Davies? He's awake, and he's asking for her again. He won't calm down until he sees her. Davies's jaw tightened. He looked at me with something close to hatred, but he couldn't refuse. Not if Smith was asking.
Fine, he said.
But I'll be present for the conversation. They'd moved him to a private room adjacent to the dining area. He was sitting on a leather couch, his tie loosened, an oxygen mask on the cushion beside him. When I walked in, his whole body went rigid. Leave us, he said, not taking his eyes off me. Sir, I don't think that's wise, Davies began. I said, leave us. Smith's voice had iron in it, the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed. Davies hesitated, then withdrew. The door clicked shut and we were alone. The silence stretched out. I stood near the door, my hands clasped in front of me, while he sat on the couch and stared at me like I was a hallucination that might disappear if he blinked. B, he finally said. It's really you. Hello, Smith. He stopped, started again. You're here, working as a waitress, in my building. I didn't know it was your building. Not when I applied. That was technically true. I'd known it was Williams Corporation, but I hadn't known he'd taken over. Hadn't known his father was dead. I'd spent 50 years not knowing anything about the Williams family, because knowing would have hurt too much. Why did you leave? The question came out raw, unguarded. Dad told me you just left one day, that you didn't want to take care of me anymore. He said you found a better position. The lie was so casual, so complete. Arthur Williams had been a master at rewriting history. That's not what happened, I said carefully. Then what had happened? I looked at him, this stranger with my boy's eyes, and I didn't know how to begin. How do you explain to someone that their entire childhood was built on lies? That the father they grieved had been a monster? Your father let me go, I said. He felt it was time for you to have a different kind of education. More formal. It was the coward's answer, a half-truth that protected us both. But Smith shook his head.
No.
You're lying. I can tell. He stood up, swayed slightly, and sat back down. All these years, I thought, he stopped. I mourned you, B. Did you know that? I cried for weeks. I thought you died. Finally, Dad told me you just left, and somehow that was worse. At least death, I could understand. The words hit me like stones. I'd known Arthur had lied to him, but I hadn't imagined this particular cruelty. I didn't leave you, I said, and my voice broke. I would never have left you. Then why did you go? Your father made me. Why? This was the moment. I could tell him the truth. Or I could give him another gentle lie and slip away. I could protect him from the knowledge that would reshape his entire past. But I'd spent 50 years being silent, and I was so tired of it. Because your mother was going to leave him, I said. She was going to take you with her. And he found out, and he blamed me for encouraging her. Smith stared at me. My mother was going to leave? She'd been planning it for months. She had an aunt in Vermont, a place she could go. She was going to file for divorce. Take you somewhere safe. Safe from what? From your father. The words hung in the air between us. Smith's face had gone very still. My father was a good man, he said, but there was a question in it. Your father was a complicated man, I said carefully. He built an empire. He was brilliant and driven, but he was also controlling and cruel when he felt threatened. Your mother was desperately unhappy, Smith. Surely you remember that.
He was quiet for a long time.
She was always sad, he finally said. Dad said she was fragile, that the world was too harsh for her. She wasn't fragile. She was trapped. And you were helping her escape. I was listening to her. That's all. Just listening. But that was enough for your father to see me as a threat. Smith stood again, more steadily this time. He walked to the window, looked out at the city his father had helped build. What happened to her plan? He asked. Why didn't she leave? This was the part one didn't know. I'd been fired on a Tuesday. Eleanor Williams had died on the following Saturday. The newspaper had called it a tragic accident, a fall down the stairs in the middle of the night. I'd read the obituary in the kitchen of the small apartment Robert and I had just rented, and I'd known in my bones that Arthur Williams had killed her. Not with his hands, maybe, but with his control, his cruelty, his absolute refusal to let her go. She'd been found at the bottom of the main staircase, with a suitcase at the top. The investigators had ruled it accidental. No one had asked questions. I don't know, I said. I was already gone. Smith turned from the window. Did you try to see me? After?
No.
Why not? Because your father made it very clear what would happen if I did. He threatened you. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Smith's expression went through several transformations. I watched him process this new history, trying to fit it with the father he'd known. The silence stretched out until it was almost unbearable. I need time, he finally said.
To think about this.
He stopped. I can't do this right now. I understand. No, you don't. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of something I couldn't read. You're here in front of me after 50 years. You're real. And everything I thought I knew about my childhood is apparently a lie. I need you to not disappear again while I figure out what to do with this. I won't disappear. Promise me. The word was so childlike, so much the boy I'd known, that it broke my heart. I promise, Smith. He nodded slowly. Then he walked past me to the door, opened it. Davies was waiting outside, along with Sean. She stays, Smith said to Davies. She keeps working here. You don't interfere with that. Understand? Davies's face was unreadable. Sir, I really think we should discuss. I'm not discussing anything. This is a direct order. He looked at Sean. You'll take care of her? Of course, Sean said. He nodded once, then walked away without looking back at me. The next 3 weeks were strange. I worked my shifts, learning the rhythms of the dining room, the preferences of the regular clients. I was good at the work, better than I'd expected. There was a comfort in the routine, in the clear expectations and immediate feedback. Serve well, get ignored. Serve poorly, get complaints. It was simple in a way my life hadn't been for a very long time. Smith didn't come back to the dining room. I heard from the other staff that he'd been working from home, taking meetings remotely. Sean mentioned once that he was processing some personal matters and gave me a look that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Sean herself was a mystery. She'd been kind but distant since the incident, treating me with a careful professionalism that felt like it was protecting both of us from something. I wanted to thank her for vouching for me with Smith, but I couldn't find the right words. At home, in the house that was still, for now, mine, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about Smith's face when I'd told him about Eleanor. The shock, the disbelief, the way his entire foundation had shifted beneath him. Robert had been dead 3 years. Cancer, slow and cruel. In his final months, when the morphine made him honest, he'd asked me about the Williams family. "Do you ever think about that boy?" he'd asked. "The one you took care of?" "Sometimes," I'd admitted. "Arthur Williams died last year. I saw it in the paper." I'd known. I'd seen the obituary, the long list of accomplishments, the photo of him shaking hands with governors and senators. "Good," I'd said, and Robert had squeezed my hand. "You could try to find the boy now. The man, I mean. He'd be, 50-something. He wouldn't remember me. You don't know that. But I'd been sure. 50 years was a lifetime. Children forgot. People moved on. It was better to leave the past buried. Except now the past was sitting in an office 12 floors above my head, trying to reconcile the father he'd mourned with the man I'd described. On the 4th Monday, Sean found me during my break.
"He wants to see you," she said.
Upstairs, in his office. My hands went cold. "When? After your shift. I'll take you up." The rest of the day crawled by. I went through my tables mechanically, barely aware of what I was doing. At 6, when my shift ended, Sean was waiting. The executive elevator required a key card. We rode up in silence, the city dropping away beneath us. Sean watched the numbers climb without expression. "He's been reading," she said quietly. "Old newspapers. Records. He had me pull everything from the year you left." "Did you find much?" "Enough." She looked at me. "Your husband worked for a subsidiary of Williams Corporation for 35 years.
"Did you know that?"
I had known. Robert had gotten the job 6 months after I was fired, a position he wasn't quite qualified for with a salary slightly higher than the going rate. It had felt like conscience money at the time, Arthur Williams's way of fulfilling whatever bargain he and Robert had made. "Yes," I said. "Mr. Williams, Smith, he's been trying to understand why his father would help your husband while forcing you to stay away. He's looking for a logic to it." "There isn't one. Just cruelty and control." The elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a reception area of glass and steel and aggressive minimalism. Sean led me through to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Smith stood by the window with his back to us. He didn't turn when we entered. "Thank you, Sean," he said. "That's all." She glanced at me once, something almost like sympathy in her eyes, and left. Smith and I stood in silence. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. "I hired a private investigator," he finally said, "to look into what you told me about my mother." My stomach dropped. Smith. He found the police report from her death, the photographs from the scene, the witness statements. He turned to face me. His eyes were hollow. There was a suitcase at the top of the stairs, packed with her clothes and jewelry, and a one-way train ticket to Burlington, Vermont, dated for the following morning. "I didn't know that," I said quietly. "No one investigated. No one asked why she was leaving in the middle of the night with a suitcase. The coroner ruled it accidental death. Case closed." His voice was flat, affectless. My father made a very large donation to the police benevolent fund the following month. I couldn't speak. "So you were right," Smith continued, "about all of it. She was leaving, and somehow she ended up dead instead." He paused. "The investigator also found the severance payment my father made to you. $5,000, which was a fortune in 1973. You deposited it in a joint account with your husband on the same day you were fired." "Yes." "And 6 months later, your husband got a job with one of my father's companies." "Yes." "So, he did take care of you, in his way." Smith's voice was bitter. "He destroyed your life, drove my mother to her death, lied to me for 50 years, and still managed to salt the earth so thoroughly that you couldn't even escape. You were on his payroll, one way or another, for the rest of your lives." It was true. All of it. The knowledge sat between us like a living thing. "I want to make this right," Smith said. "I don't know how, but I want to try. The foreclosure on your house. I can't accept your help," I said quickly. Why not? Because it would just be more of the same. More Williams money controlling my life. That's not what I'm offering. Isn't it? I met his eyes. Smith, for 50 years, I've been trying to build a life that wasn't shaped by your father. Taking your help now would mean admitting I failed. That I've been on his payroll all along and now I'm on yours. That's pride talking. Maybe, but it's all I have left. He was quiet for a long time. Then he walked to his desk, pulled out a folder. There's something else you should see, he said. Something the investigator found in my father's personal papers. He handed me the folder. Inside was a single document, yellowed with age. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. It was a marriage certificate for Arthur Williams and Eleanor Ashford, dated 1965. But there was a second page, a prenuptial agreement signed the same day. I scanned the legal language, trying to make sense of it. Then I found the relevant clause. In the event of divorce, Eleanor Ashford Williams forfeits all claim to joint assets and business holdings. Custody of any children shall be granted solely to Arthur Williams. Eleanor Ashford Williams agrees to these terms in exchange for. The rest was blocked out, redacted. My mother had money, Smith said quietly. Old money, from her family. Her parents had died when she was young, and she'd inherited everything. That money founded Williams Corporation. Dad had the idea, but she had the capital. I looked up at him. If she divorced him, Smith continued, she would have lost everything. Her money, her son, her entire life. The prenup made sure of that. He paused. I think that's why she was running in the middle of the night. It was the only way to take me with her without losing me in court. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more poisonous than I'd imagined. When did your father draw up this prenup? I asked. 2 weeks before their wedding. My mother was already pregnant with me. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Arthur Williams had trapped Eleanor before she'd even understood she was in a cage. And when she'd finally tried to escape, he'd... What? Killed her? Let her die? I'd never know for certain. But the effect was the same. I'm going to make a public statement, Smith said. About all of this. About what my father did. Smith, no. I have to. This company was built on stolen money and my mother's suffering. I can't, his voice broke. I can't keep pretending it's something noble. Something worth protecting. You'll destroy everything he built. Good, Smith said, and there was something savage in his voice. Let it burn. The press conference was scheduled for Friday. By Wednesday, the entire building was humming with rumors. Smith had called an emergency board meeting. James Davies was seen leaving the building with a box of personal effects. Sean was pulled into meeting after meeting with executives I'd never seen before. I kept working my shifts, invisible in my black uniform, listening to fragments of conversation from tables full of worried executives. Going to tank the stock price. Lost his mind. That woman who showed up, I heard she was blackmailing. I set down water glasses and cleared plates and said nothing. Thursday evening, as I was changing out of my uniform, Sean appeared in the staff room. Don't come in tomorrow, she said. Am I fired?
No.
But there's going to be press everywhere.
Protesters, probably.
It won't be safe. Protesters? She sighed, sitting down on the bench across from me. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely exhausted. Smith is going to announce that Williams Corporation was founded with money that rightfully belonged to his mother. He's going to restructure the company, rename it, redirect the charitable foundation. And he's going to tell everyone that his father potentially murdered his mother. I felt the air leave my lungs. He can't prove that.
No.
But he can prove the prenup, the suspicious circumstances, the payoffs to the police. He can create enough doubt to destroy his father's legacy. She looked at me. Is that what you want? What I want? He's doing this for you. You know that, right? Because you told him the truth about what his father did. I didn't ask him to. You didn't have to. You showed up, and you reminded him that his whole life was built on a lie. Now he's trying to make it right. She leaned forward. But here's what I need to know, Beatrice. Are you going to be there for him when it all falls apart? Or are you going to disappear again? The question hit harder than I'd expected. "I'm not disappearing," I said. "Then be at the press conference. Stand with him. Because he's about to make himself the most hated man in the city, and he's going to need someone who actually knows him." She left before I could respond. I took the bus home in the dark, watching the city slide past the windows. Robert and I had never owned a car. We'd lived modestly, carefully, always aware that our comfort existed at Arthur Williams's pleasure. Even after Robert's job had become secure, even after 30 years, we'd never quite believed it would last. And we'd been right. 6 months after Robert died, the medical bills had come due. The insurance had covered less than I'd expected. The house I'd thought was almost paid off turned out to have a second mortgage I'd never known about, taken out during Robert's final year when he'd still been handling the finances and I'd been too exhausted to ask questions. I'd learned all this from the foreclosure notice. Robert had been trying to pay his medical bills without telling me, borrowing against the house, going deeper into debt, trying to spare me the worry. Instead, he'd left me with a disaster I couldn't fix. Or maybe that wasn't fair. Maybe we'd both been drowning for longer than I'd wanted to admit, and Robert had just been the first to go under.
I didn't sleep that night.
I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, this building that had never quite felt like mine because it had always, in some sense, belonged to Arthur Williams. At dawn, I got up and put on my best dress, the navy one I'd worn to Robert's funeral. I took the bus downtown, arriving at Williams Tower just as the sun was breaking over the buildings to the east. The plaza in front of the building was already crowded. News vans with satellite dishes, reporters checking their equipment, a small group of protesters with signs, "Williams built the city and don't destroy our history." I made my way through the crowd to the building entrance. Security stopped me until Sean appeared, waving me through. "You came," she said. I said I would. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Come on. We're setting up in the main conference room." The conference room was chaos. Technicians running cables, PR people arguing about talking points, lawyers huddled in corners reviewing documents. Smith stood at the window, looking down at the crowd below. He turned when we entered. When he saw me, something in his face relaxed. "You're here," he said. "Where else would I be?" He crossed the room, and for a moment I thought he might hug me. Instead, he just stood close, looking down at me with those gray eyes. "I'm about to ruin everything my father built," he said quietly. "Tell me I'm doing the right thing." I thought about Eleanor Williams, trapped in a marriage that had stolen her money and her freedom. I thought about Smith as a little boy, crying himself to sleep because his bee had disappeared. I thought about 50 years of silence and secrets and carefully maintained lies. "The truth is the right thing," I said, "even when it costs everything." He nodded, took a breath, turned to face the room. "Let's do this." The press conference was brutal. Smith stood at a podium with floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, the city sprawling out like a kingdom he was about to abdicate. I sat in the front row next to Sean, my hands clasped tight in my lap. He started with the facts. The prenuptial agreement, Eleanor's family money, the founding of Williams Corporation with capital that had been essentially stolen through legal coercion. The reporters started shouting questions immediately, but Smith ignored them, continuing through his prepared statement. He described his mother's death, the suspicious circumstances, the investigation that had never happened. He was careful here. He didn't accuse his father of murder, just presented the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. Then he got to me. "For 50 years, he said, a woman named Beatrice Williams has lived with the consequences of my father's actions. She was my nanny. She was my mother's friend. And when my mother tried to escape, my father blamed Beatrice and destroyed her career." I felt every camera in the room turn toward me, flash bulbs going off like small explosions. My father paid Beatrice to disappear from my life. He threatened her husband's employment. He made sure she could never tell anyone what she knew about my mother's final days. And he made me believe she'd abandoned me. Smith's voice cracked slightly on the last word. He paused, took a breath. "I'm announcing today that Williams Corporation will be restructured. Half of its assets, the half that rightfully belonged to my mother, will be placed in a foundation dedicated to helping women escape abusive marriages. The Eleanor Ashford Foundation will provide legal services, safe housing, and financial support to anyone trapped the way my mother was trapped. The room erupted. Reporters shouting, cameras clicking, people standing up to get a better view. Smith raised his hand for quiet. I know this decision will cost jobs. I know it will damage the company. I know many of you will see this as a betrayal of my father's legacy.
He paused.
You're right. That's exactly what it is. Because his legacy was built on betrayal, and I will not perpetuate it. He stepped back from the podium. The room dissolved into chaos. Reporters surging forward, security pushing them back. Sean grabbed my arm, pulling me toward a side exit. This way. Quickly. We emerged into a hallway that was blessedly quiet. Smith was already there, being briefed by a lawyer. When he saw me, he waved the lawyer away. Well, he said, that's done. Are you all right? I asked. He laughed, a brittle sound.
No.
Not even remotely. But I will be. Sean's phone was ringing continuously. She glanced at it, her face pale. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're talking about removing you. Let them try, Smith said. I own 51% of voting shares. They can't touch me. They can make your life very difficult. They already are. He looked at me. I should probably warn you. You're about to become very famous. The press is going to want your story. I don't have to tell them anything. No, but they'll dig it up anyway. They'll find Robert's employment records, the severance payment, all of it. They'll try to make it seem like you were complicit. I'd known this was coming, but hearing it stated plainly still hurt.
I can handle it, I said.
Can you? He studied my face. Because it's going to get ugly, B. They're going to say you're after my money. That you manipulated me. That you're a gold digger who waited 50 years to cash in. Then I'll tell them the truth. Which is, I looked at this man who'd been my little boy, who'd grown up without me, who'd just blown up his entire life based on a story I'd told him. That I loved you, I said simply. That I love you still. And that truth matters more than protecting reputations. Something in his face softened. I'm going to pay off your mortgage, he said. Don't argue. It's not charity. It's restitution for what my father did. You lost 50 years of your life because of him. The least I can do is make sure you don't lose your home too. I wanted to argue, wanted to maintain my pride, my independence, my illusion that I could handle this alone. But I was 68 years old and so tired of fighting. Thank you, I said quietly. He nodded. Then, hesitantly, he reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm. I need to ask you something, he said. And I need you to be honest. All right. Did you know? When you applied for the job here, did you know it was my company? Here it was. The question I'd been dreading. I knew it was Williams Corporation, I said carefully. I didn't know you were running it. I didn't know your father had died. But you applied anyway. I was desperate. The house was in foreclosure. I'd tried everywhere else. And I thought I stopped. What? I thought maybe enough time had passed. That I could work here, and you'd never know. That I could be just another waitress in the building your family owned, and it would be fine. You thought you could hide. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm glad you didn't, he finally said. I'm glad I saw you. Even though it's destroyed everything I thought I knew, I'm glad. The next 2 weeks were exactly as brutal as Smith had predicted. The press camped out in front of my house. Reporters called at all hours. Someone leaked my address, and strangers started showing up at my door asking for interviews. The story had everything. Wealthy family, dead matriarch, suspicious circumstances, hidden nanny, dramatic revelations. The tabloids went wild. Half of them painted me as a saint who'd suffered in noble silence. The other half suggested I was a con artist who'd orchestrated an elaborate 50-year scheme. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than either version. Smith's board did try to remove him. They held a vote, but his controlling shares protected him. Instead, 3 board members resigned in protest. The stock price dropped 20% in a week. 2 major clients pulled their contracts. Through it all, Smith moved forward with his plan. The Eleanor Ashford Foundation was established. Assets were transferred. Lawyers fought over every detail, but the basic structure held. I stopped working at the restaurant. It was impossible to continue with reporters following me, other employees treating me like a celebrity or a pariah depending on their perspective. Sean got me set up working remotely, administrative work for the foundation, helping to establish procedures and protocols. It was strange, being involved in something that used Eleanor's name. I hadn't known her well, despite being in her house for 6 years. She'd been like a beautiful statue, present but untouchable. But I'd known her well enough to understand her sadness, her desperation. The foundation felt like the right kind of memorial. 6 weeks after the press conference, the furor started to die down. The news cycle moved on. The protesters got bored and went home. My house stopped being surrounded by cameras. On a Tuesday evening in late autumn, Smith knocked on my door. I'd given him the address, but hadn't expected him to use it. He stood on my small porch in jeans and a sweater, looking more like a person than a CEO. "I hope it's all right that I came," he said. "Of course."
Come in.
My house was small and old, and nothing like the spaces he was used to. But he looked around with genuine interest, taking in the worn furniture, the photographs on the walls, the life I'd built in the margins of his father's empire. "This is nice," he said. "It feels like a home."
It is, I said.
Or it was. I'm still getting used to the fact that it's actually mine now. He'd paid off the mortgage as promised, cleared all of Robert's medical debts, set up a trust that would cover my living expenses for the rest of my life. I'd tried to refuse the trust, but he'd been insistent. Restitution, he'd said, not charity. Now he stood in my living room, looking at a photo of Robert and me on our wedding day. "Tell me about him," Smith said. "Your husband." I was surprised by the question. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." I thought about Robert. His quiet kindness, his weak moments, his fear. "He was a good man who made a difficult choice," I said carefully. "When your father threatened us, Robert was terrified. He'd grown up poor. The idea of losing everything, of being blacklisted, it paralyzed him. So when your father offered him a job, he took it. And he spent the next 35 years trying to convince himself it was the right decision." "Did he succeed?"
No.
"I think it ate at him." He never said so directly, but I could see it. The weight of it. I paused. In his final weeks, he apologized. For not being braver. For not fighting harder to let me stay in your life. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except your father's. But we all made choices about how to respond to what he did. Some of those choices I'm proud of. Others, I shrugged. Smith was quiet, studying the photograph. "I'm trying to figure out how to remember him," he said. "My father, the man I knew was demanding but not cruel. Distant but not monstrous. And now I have all this evidence that he was both of those things. I don't know how to reconcile it." "Maybe you don't have to," I said. "Maybe people are just contradictions, capable of great vision and terrible cruelty. Both things true at once." That feels like letting him off the hook. It's not. It's just acknowledging reality. Your father did monstrous things. He also built something significant. Both can be true. Smith moved to the window, looking out at my small yard with its overgrown garden. "I keep thinking about my mother," he said. "Wondering what she was like before she married him. Whether she was happy once." "I think she must have been," I said. "To have had the courage to try to leave. She must have remembered what happiness felt like. Must have believed she could find it again." "Do you think he killed her?" The question hung in the air. I'd been waiting for it. "I think he created the circumstances that made her death possible," I said carefully. "Whether he pushed her or just made sure she was desperate enough to run in the middle of the night with a suitcase, does it matter? The effect was the same." Smith nodded slowly. "The police haven't reopened the investigation. Too much time has passed. No evidence beyond the circumstantial." "I know. So, he gets away with it." "He's dead," I said. "And his reputation is destroyed." And his son is using his fortune to help people escape the kind of situation he trapped your mother in. That's not nothing. Smith turned from the window. I want you in my life, he said abruptly. Not as an employee. As, I don't know what to call it. Family, I suppose. My throat tightened. Smith. I know it's complicated. I know we're strangers in a lot of ways. But you're also the closest thing to a mother I ever had, and I let my father's lies keep us apart for 50 years. I don't want to waste whatever time we have left. I looked at this man, seeing the boy I'd loved overlaid on the stranger he'd become. We'd both been shaped by Arthur Williams's cruelty, our lives bent around the gravity of his will. But maybe we could unbend. Maybe it wasn't too late. I'd like that, I said quietly. He smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one I'd seen from him since that day in the restaurant.
Good, he said.
Because I have no idea what I'm doing with this foundation, and you're the only person I trust to help me figure it out. The Eleanor Ashford Foundation became my life's work in a way I hadn't anticipated. Smith wanted it to be more than just a charity. He wanted it to fundamentally change how domestic abuse and financial coercion were addressed. We started with legal aid. A team of lawyers who would work pro bono to help people escape prenuptial agreements signed under duress, to fight for custody, to navigate divorces when their partners had all the power and money. Then emergency housing. Not just shelters, but actual apartments where people could live while they rebuilt their lives. We bought buildings, renovated them, hired staff. Then financial education and job training. Because leaving was only the first step. Staying away required independence. I worked with the program directors, helped establish intake procedures, reviewed applications. It was demanding work, but it felt right in a way nothing had felt since I'd left the Williams house 50 years ago. Sean turned out to be instrumental. She had a head for organization and a ruthless efficiency that kept projects on track. She and Smith worked together with an easy synchronicity that made me think of them less as employer and employee and more as partners. I wasn't surprised when Smith told me they were seeing each other. Is it inappropriate? He asked, slightly worried. She still technically works for me. She works for the foundation now, not the corporation, I pointed out. And even if she didn't, you're both adults. You're allowed to be happy. It feels strange, being happy, after everything. We were having lunch in my kitchen, a weekly tradition we'd established. He'd insisted on cooking, and my kitchen now contained more sophisticated ingredients than it had seen in decades. Your mother would want you to be happy, I said. That's what she was trying to give you when she planned to leave. A chance at a different kind of life. Do you think she'd approve of what we're doing? I thought about Eleanor Williams, that sad ghost of a woman. I think she'd be astonished and grateful. Smith nodded, stirring something on the stove. I want to tell you something about the company. All right, I'm selling it. I looked up sharply. What? Not the foundation, that's permanent, but Williams Corporation itself. I've been in talks with a consortium that wants to buy it. The offer is generous. And he paused. I don't want to run my father's company anymore. I don't want to spend my life maintaining something he built. I want to build something of my own. What will you build? I don't know yet. But whatever it is, it'll be mine. Not his legacy. Not his empire. Just mine. There was something both sad and hopeful in his voice. Letting go of his father's company meant letting go of the last connection to the life he'd thought he had. But it also meant freedom. I think that's brave, I said. You think it's running away?
No.
I think it's running toward. There's a difference. He smiled, that same real smile I was seeing more and more often. Over the next 6 months, I watched Smith dismantle his father's empire piece by piece. The corporation was sold. The family name was removed from buildings across the city. The charitable foundation that had been established in Arthur Williams's name was dissolved, its assets transferred to the Eleanor Ashford Foundation. It was systematic erasure, and it was deliberate. Some people called it vindictive. The business press criticized him for destroying his father's legacy over family drama. A few columnists suggested he was being manipulated by me, the scheming nanny who'd waited 50 years for revenge. but most people understood what he was doing, especially the people the foundation helped. I met some of them in the course of my work. People escaping marriages that had trapped them. People rebuilding lives after years of financial abuse. They'd thank me, and I'd think about Eleanor Williams and wonder if this was what justice looked like. Not revenge, not punishment, just making sure that what had happened to her couldn't happen to others quite so easily. 2 years after that first press conference, the foundation held a gala fundraiser. It was Smith's idea, a way to generate publicity and donations and show that the foundation was thriving despite all the controversy. I'd try to skip it. I didn't like crowds or attention, and the thought of being in a ballroom full of wealthy donors made me anxious. But Smith insisted. "You're the co-founder," he said. "You have to be there." "I'm not a co-founder. I'm an administrative assistant. You're the Eleanor Ashford Foundation's first employee and the person who runs half our programs. You're absolutely a co-founder. And besides," he paused, "I need you there. Please." So I went, in a dress Sean helped me pick out, feeling like an imposter at my own event. The gala was held in a hotel ballroom that had been transformed with flowers and lights. Hundreds of people in evening wear, drinking champagne and talking about the foundation's work with the kind of passionate interest that usually requires alcohol. I stood near the wall, trying to be invisible, watching Smith work the room with Sean at his side. They looked good together, her vibrancy balancing his intensity, his quiet strength supporting her energy. "You must be very proud." I turned to find an older woman standing next to me, elegant in a silver dress. "Excuse me? Of your son, of what he's built here." She smiled.
I'm Margaret Chen.
I knew Eleanor, actually. We went to school together. "Oh," I said, surprised. I didn't realize. It was a long time ago. We lost touch after she married Arthur. Margaret's expression grew sad. I tried to stay in contact, but he made it difficult. And Eleanor, she just seemed to fade away. She was very unhappy, I said carefully. "I know. I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't," she stopped. "I should have done more. Should have asked harder questions." "It wasn't your fault." "Perhaps not. But guilt isn't always about fault, is it? Sometimes it's about all the things we didn't do." She looked at me. "I read about what happened. What Arthur did to you, to Eleanor. And I wanted to tell you that I believe you. I know there are people who think you're making it up or exaggerating, but I believe you. I knew Arthur. I saw how he was with her." The validation was unexpected and surprisingly moving.
Thank you, I said.
Margaret nodded. "What you and Smith are doing, it matters. It would have mattered to Eleanor."
She paused.
"May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you happy? After everything that happened, after all these years, did you find happiness?" It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. Was I happy? I looked around the ballroom. At Smith laughing at something Sean had said. At the banners describing the foundation's work. At the people who'd come to support something good being built from the ruins of something terrible. "I'm getting there," I said. Margaret smiled. "That's all any of us can hope for, I suppose." Later, Smith found me on the balcony where I'd escaped for air. "There you are," he said. "I was looking for you. I want you to meet some people, donors who specifically asked about you." "Smith, I'm not good at this. The schmoozing, the small talk." "You don't have to schmooze. Just be yourself. Tell them why the work matters." He paused. "Please? It would mean a lot to me." I sighed.
"Fine."
"But if I embarrass you..." "You won't." He led me back inside, to a group of well-dressed people who looked at me with what seemed like genuine interest. Smith introduced me as the foundation's heart and soul, which was embarrassing but also warm. They asked questions about the programs, about how we decided who to help, about what success looked like. I answered honestly, telling them about the people I'd met, the lives that had been changed, the work that still needed doing. And somewhere in the middle of talking, I realized I wasn't nervous anymore. This wasn't performance or pretense. This was just talking about something I cared about with people who wanted to listen. When the conversation ended and the donors moved on, Smith squeezed my shoulder.
See, he said.
You're a natural. I'm really not. You are. You just don't realize it. He looked around the ballroom. This is good, isn't it? What we've built. Yes, I said. It's good. I keep waiting for it to feel like enough. Like I've done enough to balance what my father did. But it never quite. Smith, I interrupted gently. You can't balance it. What your father did was monstrous, and nothing we do will erase that. But we're not trying to erase it. We're just trying to make sure something good grows from it. That's all we can do. He nodded slowly. I think about her sometimes. My mother. Wonder what she'd think of all this. I think she'd be grateful, I said. And I think she'd be proud of you. I hope so. He was quiet for a moment. B, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret it? Any of it? If you could go back and choose differently, would you? I thought about the question. About the road not taken. The life I might have had if I'd fought harder or run faster, or been braver. I regret that I let fear silence me for so long, I said. I regret the years you grew up without me. But do I regret loving you? Regret being part of your life, even in this complicated way?
No.
Never. Smith's eyes were bright. I'm glad you applied for that job. Even though it was terrifying and painful and complicated, I'm glad you came back into my life. So am I. We stood together on the balcony, looking out at the city. The same city Arthur Williams had helped build, now full of buildings that no longer bore his name. There's a song you used to sing to me, Smith said quietly. When I was sick or couldn't sleep. Something about a river. I felt tears prick my eyes. I hadn't thought about that song in decades. The river runs to the sea, I said softly. And the sea runs to the sky. And the sky runs to the river in the sweet by and by. That's it, Smith said. I'd forgotten the words, but I remembered the melody. And I remembered feeling safe. I took his hand, this grown man who'd once been my little boy. The river runs to the sea, I sang, my voice thin and wavering but true. And the sea runs to the sky. And the sky runs to the river in the sweet by and by. Smith's voice joined mine on the second verse, tentative at first, then stronger. We sang together, our voices carrying out over the city, a lullaby for lost time and found family and the long, winding path that had brought us back to each other. When we finished, we stood in silence for a while. Then Smith said, "Thank you." For what? For coming back, for telling me the truth, for helping me build something worth building. He paused. For being my bee. I squeezed his hand. Always, I said. I'll always be your bee. And for the first time in 50 years, standing on that balcony with my boy who'd become a good man despite everything, I felt something I'd thought I'd lost forever. I felt like I was home. 5 years after the gala, I was sitting in my garden when Smith and Sean came to visit. They'd gotten married the year before, a small ceremony that had made me cry happy tears. Now they stood in my yard, Sean's hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, both of them looking nervous and excited. We wanted to tell you in person, Sean said, before we tell anyone else. I already knew, of course. The pregnancy was obvious if you knew where to look. But I let them tell me, watched their faces light up as they shared the news. We were hoping, Smith said carefully, that you might want to be involved. As a grandmother. The word hit me in the chest, unexpected and precious. I would love that. I managed. Sean sat down next to me on the bench, taking my hand. We want our daughter to know her history. The real history, not the sanitized version. We want her to know about Eleanor, about what happened, about how we built something good from something terrible. And we want her to know you, Smith added. Really know you. Not as an employee or an obligation, but as family. I looked at these two people who'd become so precious to me, who'd helped me rebuild a life I'd thought was over. I'm an old woman, I said. I don't know how much time. However much time we have, Smith interrupted. That's what we want. All of it. So, I became a grandmother. When Eleanor Grace Williams, named for Smith's mother and Sean's grandmother, was born, I was in the hospital room. I held her in the first hour of her life, this tiny, perfect thing, and I sang her the river song. The river runs to the sea, and the sea runs to the sky. She opened her eyes and looked at me, and I felt the circle complete itself. From one Eleanor to another, across generations and grief, and the slow work of healing. I'm an old woman now. My hands shake more than they used to. I move slowly, but I'm surrounded by family, Smith and Sean and little Eleanor, who calls me Grandma B and brings me dandelions from the yard. The foundation continues its work. We've helped thousands of people escape situations like the one that trapped Eleanor Sr. We've changed laws, influenced policy, shifted the conversation about financial abuse and coercive control. It doesn't erase what Arthur Williams did. Nothing can do that. But it means something grew from that poison ground. Something good and strong and true. I think about Robert sometimes. Wonder what he'd make of all this. I like to think he'd be proud. That he'd understand why I finally stopped being silent. I think about Eleanor, the sad ghost woman I barely knew, and I hope she'd be glad that her name stands for freedom now instead of tragedy. And I think about the choice I made, walking into that building 2 years after Robert died, desperate and terrified and hoping for invisibility. I didn't get invisibility. I got something better. I got my life back. The river runs to the sea, and the sea runs to the sky. And somehow, against all odds and across 50 years of silence, we found our way to the sweet by and by.